Hello, I'm Corin. After our housewarming party, I suggested we save the gift money, pay down the mortgage, build a future. But my wife? She grabbed the envelope before I could finish. Her parents barged in like they owned the place. Her father leaned in close and said with a smirk, "Relax, son. That money belongs to the real family." Then they laughed. And they left. With every dollar, every document, every piece of dignity I had. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I stayed quiet. But silence, it isn't weakness. It's the space where a plan takes shape. 2 weeks later, they came back from their luxury trip to locked doors and a note waiting on the floor. "Enjoy your trip. I already did." Want to know how I turned silence into power? You might want to sit down for this. The house still smelled of paint and lemon cleaner when the first guests arrived. I'd spent half the morning polishing the banister, straightening picture frames, and telling myself this was what accomplishment felt like. After 20 years of apartment living, Marla and I finally had a place that was ours, or so I believed. By late afternoon, the backyard was filled with neighbors, co-workers, and the faint sound of someone laughing too loud near the grill. Marla looked beautiful, hair pinned up, bright dress that caught the last of the sunlight. She floated from one group to another like she'd been hosting parties her whole life. I mostly refilled drinks, nodded at compliments, and told the story about how I'd laid the floorboards myself. When the sun slipped behind the houses, we moved inside. Someone turned on the kitchen light too bright, and everyone started leaving little envelopes on the counter near the fruit bowl. I remember thinking how normal it all felt. People giving, hugging, saying, "Congrats again, you two," and stepping out into the night. By the time the last guest left, it was just us and the low hum of the refrigerator. I stacked the envelopes, thick and soft with bills, and sat beside Marla on the couch. "You know," I said, half smiling, "if we put this toward the mortgage, we could clear almost a year's worth of payments. Feels like the responsible thing to do." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the stack, then back to me. "Can we not talk about money tonight? It's been a long day." "I'm not trying to argue," I said. Before I could finish, the front door swung open. I thought maybe a guest forgot their keys, but then I heard the familiar voice. "Anyone home?" Cole's baritone carried through the hallway. Behind him came Ellen, his wife, still wearing her pearls like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Marla stood quickly. "Dad, Mom, I thought you left hours ago." Cole didn't answer. His eyes landed on the envelopes. He grinned, the kind of grin that never reached his eyes. "Well, look at that. People still give cash these days." Marla tried to speak, but he was already walking toward the counter. He picked up the top envelope, flipped it in his hand, and let out a low whistle. "Don't worry, son," he said, turning to me. "This money belongs to the real family." Ellen laughed softly, touching his arm as if he'd made a harmless joke. Marla's lips pressed into a thin line. I froze. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. I wanted to say something, anything, but my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. "It's fine," Marla said quickly. "They helped with the down payment. Let's not make it a thing." Cole gathered the envelopes, tucking them neatly under his arm. "Good boy," he said, as though I just agreed to something. "You'll thank me one day." Then he turned, his shoes clicking on the new hardwood as he headed for the door. They laughed as they left, a short, sharp laugh that echoed far longer than it should have. Marla sank into the couch. "You know how he gets," she said, He probably didn't mean it like that. Sure, I muttered, though even I didn't believe it. We cleaned up in silence. The glasses clinked too loud, and the smell of wine turned sour in the air. When she went upstairs, I stayed behind. The counter looked empty now, just a faint rectangle of dust where the envelopes had been. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass of the sliding door. Across the room, above the mantel, hung a framed photo of Grandma Nora. She'd raised me after my mother died, a woman who didn't say much, but whose words never left you. I stared at that photo until her voice came back like a whisper. Don't lose your name, boy. Once they take that, you're no one. I sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, the silence stretching between the walls. When I finally went upstairs, Marla was asleep, one arm draped across the empty side of the bed. I lay down, eyes open, the ceiling fan slicing the dark into quiet circles. Maybe it was just money, I told myself. Maybe keeping peace was worth swallowing this. But somewhere between those thoughts, something shifted. Something small, almost invisible. Maybe silence wasn't peace at all. Maybe it was how they won. By morning, the laughter was still playing in my head. Not the kind you remember fondly, the kind that crawls under your skin. It was quiet in the house, the kind of quiet that feels staged, like the silence after someone slams a door but pretends everything's fine. I came downstairs in socks, careful not to wake anything that hadn't already died overnight. The living room still held the scent of last night, wilted roses from the centerpiece, stale champagne in half-empty flutes, and something else. Maybe disappointment. The envelopes were gone, not just physically. Even their presence felt erased. Only a faint rectangle of undisturbed dust remained on the counter, a shadow where trust used to be. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that outline. Then I brewed coffee. The machine sputtered and hissed like it was waking up from a bad dream. I leaned against the sink, arms crossed, watching the pot fill drop by drop, like it needed time to process what happened too. Footsteps behind me, light, casual. Morning, Marla said, tying her robe with one hand. Her hair was a little messy, the kind of mess people do on purpose to look effortless. Morning, I replied. My voice sounded flatter than I intended. She opened the fridge, pulled out almond milk, then turned toward me like she just remembered something. Oh, Dad said we'll probably take that Florida trip next month. Said it's all booked and everything. I turned to her, blinking. Booked? With what? She poured the milk into her coffee without meeting my eyes. He handled it. Said it's a treat. Family thing. I waited, letting the air sit heavy for a second before I asked, Did he take the envelope? She paused just long enough for me to know she'd expected the question. Her shrug was too smooth. It's all family, Corin. Why make it weird? That hit harder than if she'd shouted. It's all family. A phrase so clean and practiced it felt rehearsed. It was the kind of phrase people use when they want you to stop asking questions, when they want your silence more than your understanding. She took her mug and walked out of the kitchen without another word. The sound of her steps faded upstairs. Doors opened, drawers closed. Normal life had resumed. I stood still for a while, coffee warm in my hand, eyes drifting across the counter. That's when I saw it. A folded, crumpled piece of glossy paper, partially tucked under a stack of paper towels. Probably slipped out of someone's coat pocket last night. I pulled it free. It was a receipt. Fancy print, dark navy ink. The top corner read, Seabridge Luxury Travel Agency, The total at the bottom made my stomach knot. It matched the rough count of what was in those envelopes, down to the dollar. The destination, Florida Gulf Coast, 5-star beachfront resort, paid in full. The receipt trembled slightly between my fingers. Not from rage, not yet. Just disbelief. A quiet ache spreading through my chest like the start of a bruise. It wasn't just the money, it was the speed of it, the assumption, the entitlement, the idea that my voice wasn't even part of the equation. Behind me, the coffee machine beeped twice. The sound felt sarcastic. I sat at the table and stared at the receipt, smoothing it gently like it might change if I looked at it long enough. But it didn't change. It just confirmed what I already knew. I was the outsider at my own kitchen table. Eventually, I folded the paper and slid it into my wallet behind my driver's license. Not out of sentiment. I just knew I'd need to remember, not the number, but the feeling, the silence, the soft theft dressed up like generosity. If they can take what's mine and call it love, I thought, I need to learn what love really costs. The sun had crept through the blinds by then, casting stripes across the table. Warm light in a cold house. Marla reappeared, keys in hand. I'm running a few errands. You good? I nodded. Yeah. She didn't notice the way I was gripping my wallet. Or if she did, she didn't ask. She kissed the air somewhere near my temple and left. The door clicked shut like punctuation. I waited until her car backed out of the driveway before I stood up and refilled my cup. Then I just stood there for a while, watching the sunlight crawl across the countertop, inch by inch. I wasn't angry, not yet, but something was changing. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. More like when the temperature drops just enough that you notice your breath in the air. 3 days passed. Work felt longer than usual, full of empty chatter and the dull rhythm of keys clicking. I stayed late, not because I had to, but because going home meant facing the silence that waited for me there. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. Through the window, I could see Marla sitting on the couch, legs tucked under her, the glow of her phone lighting up her face. She was laughing, the kind of laugh people save for someone they actually want to talk to. I stepped inside quietly, set my briefcase by the door. Hey, I said. She looked up briefly, smiled just enough to count as polite acknowledgement, then went back to scrolling. Hey, you. Long day? Yeah, I said. You? Just catching up on posts. Dad shared some of the photos from the party. You should see them. They turned out great. She tilted her phone toward me, then changed her mind and kept scrolling instead. I walked past her toward the kitchen, pretending not to care. The refrigerator hummed, and I poured myself a glass of water. From where I stood, I could still hear her giggling. Something about that sound, carefree and distant, pulled me back to the couch. What's so funny? I asked. She handed me the phone this time, the screen still glowing. It was a post from Cole. The caption read, Family Night. So proud of Marla and her parents. Below it, a slideshow scrolled automatically. Photo after photo. Marla smiling between her parents, glasses raised, the house glowing under warm lights. A shot of the dinner table, one of Cole toasting with a neighbor, even a group picture. Familiar faces arranged neatly, like a perfect postcard. Except, I wasn't there. I leaned closer, double-checking. Maybe I was in the background, blurry, caught mid-laugh. But no, my place beside Marla was filled by someone else's arm. My shoulder had been cropped cleanly out, the edge smooth, deliberate. Did you notice? I began. She cut me off lightly, still smiling. Aren't they great shots? Mom's friend took them on her new phone. Such good lighting. Yeah, I said quietly. Good lighting. I scrolled again. Each photo was like a small erasure. Little moments that used to include me, now rewritten without my existence. The comments rolled in. What a beautiful family. You all look amazing. Marla, you're glowing. I kept scrolling, half out of disbelief, half out of something darker. Curiosity, maybe. How far would they go? How easy was it to erase someone who didn't fight back? Then I saw Cole's comment under one of the photos. Family is everything. That one hit differently. My thumb froze over the screen. I locked the phone and set it on the coffee table. And I'm nothing, right? I whispered, though no one was listening. Marla didn't look up. She'd already moved on to another conversation thread, her laughter soft and distant, like music from another room. I excused myself and went upstairs. In the bathroom, the mirror caught me mid-step. I looked older than I remembered, not by years, but by weight. The kind that settles behind your eyes when you stop being seen. I turned on the faucet, splashed water on my face, and watched the droplets slide down the glass. The man looking back at me didn't seem angry, just smaller, faded. In my head, I rehearsed the conversation I'd never have. Why didn't you stop him? Why didn't you speak up? Why didn't you post your own truth? But the answers felt hollow even before I thought them. I went back downstairs, grabbed my phone from the table, and opened the post again. I took a screenshot. Then another. One by one, I saved every image where I didn't exist. Not to confront anyone. Not yet. Just to have proof. Proof that the world could pretend you never mattered. And that sometimes even the people closest to you were happy to help it along. The TV flickered in the background. Marla yawned and said she was going to bed. She didn't notice me slip my phone into my pocket or the way I stared at the blank TV screen long after she left the room. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to the quiet between betrayals. They'd erased me once. Let's see how long it takes them to notice when I stop showing up. That Saturday, the air had a sharper edge. The kind of crispness that clings to your sleeves and reminds you October's closing in. I watched dry leaves spiral in the driveway while waiting for Marla to finish touching up her lipstick. She stood by the mirror, adjusting her earrings with the ease of someone headed to something familiar. A performance she'd rehearsed 100 times. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. No comment, no questions. She didn't notice. The car ride was filled with the kind of chatter that didn't ask for replies. She talked about a new blouse her mom had ordered online, how her dad just had his deck restained by someone who actually listens, and how good it would be to keep things smooth tonight. That word again. Smooth. I stared out the window, watching dusk lean over the rooftops. Cole's house looked like it always did. Proud, overlit, pretending it hadn't aged. The walkway had been edged recently, the hedges clipped into tight little domes, the illusion of control right down to the shrubbery. Inside, the warmth hit like a curtain. The table glowed with overhead lights, silver cutlery lined up like soldiers. A roast sat steaming at the center, surrounded by carefully plated sides. Ellen poured wine without looking at me. "Good to see you," she said to Marla. "You too," Marla smiled, hanging her coat. Cole came in, clapping his hands together like he was walking onto a stage. "There's my girl," he beamed, hugging Marla. Then, with a passing nod, "Corin." We took our seats. Cole, of course, sat at the head, Marla to his right, Ellen opposite him, and me, at the far end, across from no one. like a guest added last minute. Dinner began with the clang of forks and the hum of stories. Cole talked about a property flip that only happened because I saw what no one else could. He praised the contractor, himself, and the negotiations, also himself. Some people just know how to build value, he said, slicing into the roast. Others just live in it. Marla laughed, a little too loudly. Ellen gave her a look I couldn't read. I listened. I nodded. I chewed slow, tasted nothing. To family, Cole raised his glass. To the ones who build it and keep it strong. Everyone raised theirs. I did too. No one looked in my direction. Midway through the meal, between the second round of wine and a story about Cole's boat plans in Naples, I decided to try something. I was thinking of refinancing the mortgage this winter, I said, calm, low, but clear enough. No reaction. Ellen was pouring more wine. Marla was laughing at something her father had just said. Cole kept talking about marinas and tax write-offs. I swallowed hard. Not the food, the realization. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't push. Instead, I picked up my glass, swirled the wine gently, and stared at the slow spin of red. Every time they ignored me, I felt less pain and more certainty. This wasn't a family table. It was a boardroom, and I wasn't on the invite list. I was just tolerated. The longer they talked, the quieter I became. My silence wasn't empty anymore. It had shape now. Purpose. By the time dessert came out, some store-bought pie Ellen reheated, I had already made up my mind. I stood slowly. "Thank you for dinner," I said. They glanced up in sync, like a chorus line. "You're leaving already?" Marla asked, more out of routine than concern. "Long week," I replied. "I'll see you at home." Outside, the cold air hit my chest like truth. I walked to the car alone, hands in pockets, the sound of laughter muffled behind the front door. The house, that dinner, it would all keep spinning just fine without me. I sat in the driver's seat, started the engine, and watched their house lights glow through the windshield. "They think they silenced me," I murmured, backing out slowly. They just gave me time to think. By Sunday morning, thinking was all I had done. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of stillness that makes a house feel heavier. Marla was already dressed when I came down. She was humming softly, scrolling through her phone, wearing that same distant calm that had started to feel like armor. "I'm meeting my parents for lunch," she said without looking up. "They want to go over some plans." "Plans?" I asked. "Just family stuff," she replied quickly, slipping her coat on. She leaned down, kissed my cheek, a gesture so practiced it felt transactional, and was gone before I could ask anything else. The door closed, leaving behind the faint trace of her perfume and a silence that filled the whole room. I sat at the kitchen table for a while, coffee untouched, the steam thinning until it disappeared completely. Eventually, I stood up and wandered. Not aimlessly, just without purpose. Every room felt like a museum of decisions I hadn't made. I found myself at the bottom of the attic ladder before I realized where I was going. The pull to climb came from somewhere older than memory. The attic smelled of dust and cedar. The light filtering through the small window painted everything in a dull silver. Boxes lined the far wall. Old Christmas decorations, papers from my last job, and one smaller chest covered in a thin film of neglect. I recognized it instantly. Grandma Nora's keepsake box. She'd given it to me when I was 15, with one of her long looks that always seemed to see more than she said. Back then, I thought it was just a box of sentimental clutter, ticket stubs, faded postcards, an old locket, and a few small trinkets that meant more to her than to me. But today, as I knelt down and brushed the dust away, it felt like something waiting. The hinges creaked as I opened it. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. There it was, a small, rusted key tied to a ribbon that had once been blue. The color had faded into something between gray and memory. Taped to the lid, a yellowed note in her handwriting, shaky but deliberate. "Don't lose your name, boy. Once they take that, you're no one." I sat down on the cold wooden floor, reading that line over and over. Her words were never casual. Grandma Nora had grown up during hard times, when people lost more than money. They lost their pride, their identity, their voice. She used to tell me, "Some people don't steal what you own, Corin. They steal who you are, piece by piece, until you don't recognize yourself." And sitting there, I realized she'd been right. I hadn't lost anything suddenly. It had been a slow giving up. One quiet compromise after another. A swallowed word here, an ignored insult there, until silence had become my second language. I turned the key over in my hand, feeling its weight. It wasn't heavy, but it carried something old. A kind of truth no one could fake. Downstairs, the refrigerator motor kicked on. A faint, domestic hum. Life still happening around the edges of what wasn't working. I thought about the envelope, about the missing photos, about that dinner table where my words went unheard. And then, about the note, about name. It wasn't just about titles or signatures. It was about ownership. The quiet right to exist, unedited. I went downstairs carrying the box with me, placed it on the counter beside the untouched coffee mug. I poured another cup, slower this time. Watched the dark liquid swirl before settling. It was strange. How something as simple as making coffee could feel like reclaiming rhythm, like telling the world, "I'm still here." I whispered to the empty room, "They took the envelope. They won't take my name." The sound of my own voice surprised me. It didn't echo. It landed. I carried the key to my desk and set it there, just above a stack of unpaid bills and an old photo of Nora. Her eyes, sharp even through fading ink, seemed to approve. "Every lock turns both ways," she used to say. "You just have to decide which direction you're willing to turn first." For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel small. I felt deliberate. Outside, the clouds began to shift. A sliver of weak sunlight reached through the blinds, landing right on the key, making it gleam for a second, then fade back into shadow. I locked the box again and slid it carefully under the bed. "They taught me silence," I said softly. "Now I'll use it better than they ever did." The next few evenings passed like water under a still surface, silent, steady, but undeniably moving. Marla had started taking her phone calls in the hallway, walking up and down with one hand tucked into her hair and the other flicking through Instagram posts she didn't want me to see. I didn't ask questions. I didn't offer conversation. Silence was working. She thought she had won it as a retreat. She didn't realize I had made it a weapon. In our home office, the light was dim, but focused. I'd replaced the old bulb a few nights earlier. Something about clear light helped me think sharper. The desk was neat, more so than usual, with everything I didn't need shoved into the drawers. The only things left, the mortgage documents, the joint savings file, and a picture of us from 5 years ago that I'd turned face down. My phone buzzed once. I picked it up before it rang again. "Joseph," I said, low and steady. "You're sure about this?" he asked on the other end. His voice was warm, but edged with that lawyer's caution. You want to move the property into your name alone? Temporarily, I replied. Just need a clean reset. No drama. All legal. Paper trail solid. There was a pause. I owe you, he said. You helped me stay sane through my divorce, remember? Hard to forget, I said, watching the cursor blink in a Word doc I hadn't typed in weeks. Okay, send over the scanned signatures. We'll keep it quiet. This won't ring any alarms unless she's looking for them. She's not, I replied. She thinks I'm in here working late again. After we hung up, I moved carefully. Print, sign, scan, send. Everything had to be precise. Not fast, not messy, not angry. Just right. That night, while Marla texted in bed with her screen turned away from me, I stayed in the office under the soft hum of the desk lamp. The key from Grandma Nora sat beside my keyboard. Not for unlocking anything in the house, but for unlocking something in me. Control. One by one, I pulled the necessary strings. The title of the house transferred to me through a quick claim. Joint accounts rerouted to personal checking. The apartment we'd once leased together, still in her name, now carried an addendum with only my initials. The old life insurance policy with both our names? Paused. No need to alert her, just adjusted. All done without breaking a single law. No shouting, no threats, just paperwork. I found a strange peace in it. Not excitement, not vindication, just control. It was like aligning a bookshelf after years of watching it tilt. The next morning, she mentioned her Florida plans over oatmeal. Dad said we could take the boat out this time, she smiled. You know, just relax. I stirred my coffee slowly. Sounds nice, I said. You'll all have a great time. You're not coming? She asked, almost surprised. I shook my head. Too much to wrap up here. End of quarter. Reports to finish. She didn't argue. She never wanted me there in the first place. Later that night, while she watched a movie downstairs, I sat at the same desk and reviewed the final confirmation email. The subject line read, Ownership updated. Effective immediately. I leaned back in the chair, let out a slow breath, and looked at the photo I'd flipped over days before. I picked it up, studied our smiles frozen in a time before all of this. Then I placed it gently in the drawer and shut it. The key still sat there, unmoved, gleaming under the light. I smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just enough for me. Now let's see how the real family handles being guests, I whispered to no one. The next morning, December's chill crept through the windows, even though the heat was on. It wasn't just the cold. It was the quiet. The kind of quiet you don't fear anymore, but grow into like a perfectly tailored coat. Marla was up before dawn, dragging her suitcase down the hallway, her heels echoing off the tile like a farewell parade. She hummed as she packed, a melody I didn't recognize. Probably something from a beach playlist she'd built without me. I watched from the kitchen doorway as she zipped her bag. Her parents were waiting in the car out front, engine running. Ellen had texted earlier, make sure Corin doesn't forget to water the plants. Plants. That's what I was now. Something to manage while they were gone. Cole came in briefly to grab an umbrella. He caught my eye, then walked over, giving me that familiar clap on the shoulder. We'll take care of her, son. Family looks after its own. I held his gaze, steady and plain. I'm counting on that. He chuckled, not catching the tone. Or maybe he did and ignored it. Men like Cole were always better at pretending than listening. Marla leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. Be good while we're gone, she said, like I was a child staying behind with the sitter. Always, I replied, then opened the front door. They wheeled the last bag out and climbed into the car. The trunk slammed, a quick wave through the window, and just like that, they were gone, headed for their Florida dream, paid for with everything they thought I'd given up. I stood there until the taillights disappeared, then quietly shut the door behind me. That silence, it wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. I walked back to the study. The key was already on the desk beside the deed. The ink on the title change was barely a week old, but it felt older, like something ancient I'd finally returned to its rightful place. Every lock had been replaced 2 nights before. I hadn't rushed it. I took my time, fitting each new cylinder with a steady hand, wiping away the old fingerprints from the doorknobs. There was no music, no fanfare, no anger, just peace. By late afternoon, I'd done a full sweep of the apartment. I opened every drawer, rearranged every cabinet, not out of spite, but intention. This was my home now. Not a shared space, not a borrowed corner. Mine. Their bathroom products went into a single storage bin. Her makeup bag, tucked away in the back of the linen closet. Every framed photo with me cropped out. I took those down, slid them under the guest bed, face down. Then I stood in the center of the living room and looked around. I didn't feel powerful. I felt right. At dusk, I brewed a single cup of coffee, the way I used to before Marla switched us to cold brew. I sat by the window as the sky turned gray and typed one text. Enjoy your trip. I already did. Sent. No reply needed. I turned off the phone, dropped it into the drawer beside the key, and closed it gently. Then I walked to the bedroom, turned down the covers, and laid myself into the mattress without checking emails, notifications, or messages from her family group chat. That night, I slept so deeply, I forgot to set an alarm. And when I woke the next morning, sunlight slipping through the curtains, I didn't check the time. I just laid there, listening to the absolute stillness. No footsteps, no tension, no pretending. Later that afternoon, I noticed it had started snowing, the first real snowfall of the season. I stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the flakes drift down and melt against the glass. They'd come back eventually. That much I knew, but not to the home they thought they left behind. I whispered to myself, voice calm and steady, they'll come back to a home they never really saw. That was the last thought I spoke aloud before turning away from the window, letting the snow keep falling on a world that no longer asked me to explain myself. 14 days, exactly 2 weeks of unbothered mornings, clean countertops, coffee brewed just the way I like it, and silence that didn't press against my ribs. It simply lived beside me. And then it ended. It started with the distant hum of a taxi pulling up the curb, the engine too loud, like it didn't belong in this quiet block. I glanced at the clock. 6:07 p.m. A few seconds later came the first thud, then the voice I hadn't missed. Corin, what the hell is this? I didn't answer. I didn't move. Keys jangled. A lock clicked, then clicked again. A frustrated pause, then more banging, this time harder, faster. Why won't the damn keys work? Marla's voice cracked through the hallway like a snapped wire. I walked slowly to the door. No rush. I knew exactly what was waiting on the other side. When I opened it halfway, they were all there. Marla with her suitcase handle clenched in white knuckles, Ellen frozen behind her like someone just told her the ground was unsafe, and Cole looked like a man used to winning, just now realizing he'd walked onto the wrong field. He didn't wait. He shoved the door, but I kept my hand firm on it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Evening, I said. Cole's face flushed. Is this some kind of joke? We come back and our keys don't work? Our joint accounts are locked. The mail's been rerouted. Not a joke, I interrupted, voice level. Just overdue housekeeping. Marla stepped forward. Her eyes weren't angry yet, they were confused, and that was worse. She truly hadn't seen this coming. Corin, what did you do? I cleaned up, I said, stepping back just enough for them to see the framed deed on the entryway wall. My name. Alone. Cole glanced at it, then scoffed. You think a piece of paper makes you king of the castle? No, I said. But it makes me the owner of this home. Legally. Joseph made sure of that. Marla's mouth parted. She looked from me to the frame and back again. This isn't fair, she whispered. You're right, I replied. It wasn't. For years. Ellen finally spoke, her voice cold and sharp. This isn't how family handles disagreements. I tilted my head. You're right again, but it's exactly how your family handled mine. Behind group photos, behind cropped edges, and champagne smiles. Cole stepped forward, his hand clenched around his keyring. He yanked one of the old keys off and threw it hard at the floor. It skittered across the hardwood and landed at my feet. There, he growled. Keep your precious house. I picked up the key slowly and placed it on the nearby shelf beside the old envelope. The same envelope they handed us at the wedding, thick with bills at the time, a gift with strings knotted tight. I passed it to Marla. She stared at it like it might burn her hand. Inside was a note. Simple. One line. Enjoy your trip. I already did. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. Her hands trembled. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. You can't just erase us, she finally said. I didn't, I answered. You erased me first. I just noticed. Ellen reached for her daughter's shoulder, but Marla pulled away, eyes still locked on me. Behind them, the hallway light flickered. Or maybe I imagined it. Either way, the weight had shifted, and I wasn't the one carrying it anymore. We were your family, Cole said. No, I replied, softer this time. I was your audience. There's a difference. Nobody moved. Nobody yelled. And that silence, that was the loudest thing in the room. They turned to go. No goodbyes, no parting shots. Just the scrape of rolling luggage and the echo of shoes on tile. Cole muttered something under his breath, probably to save face. Ellen clutched her purse like she could disappear into it. Marla looked back once. Her eyes didn't ask for forgiveness, just answers she'd never bothered to look for. The elevator swallowed them in a blink. I stood in the doorway for a moment, then slowly closed the door. From behind it, I heard Cole's voice rise one last time, muffled and distant. You'll regret this. I locked the door. One click, walked back to the living room, stepped past the shelf where the key still sat, and as I reached the window, watching the flakes drift heavier now, I whispered back, No, I finally don't. I stood at the window for a long time after they left. Snowflakes drifted in thick silence, settling like forgotten memories on the sidewalk below. Each one vanished the moment it touched the glass, but I kept watching, letting the quiet seep in. No footsteps, no shouting, just the muffled hum of winter and my breath against the pane. Eventually, I turned away. The house no longer echoed with tension or hollow laughter. It was still, and for the first time, that stillness wasn't a punishment. It was permission. A soft nod from life itself, telling me I didn't have to fight anymore. The desk lamp cast a warm circle across the surface, revealing the old wooden box I hadn't touched since before they returned. I pulled it close, lifted the lid gently. Inside, nestled on the velvet lining, was Grandma Nora's rusted key. It looked smaller than I remembered, like a relic from someone else's life. Next to it, I placed the spare I'd had cut just last week. Polished silver, clean edges, a future with a handle, 2 keys, 2 versions of me. The old one was for the boy who thought silence meant weakness, who stayed quiet to keep peace that never belonged to him. The new one, that belonged to the man who learned silence could mean clarity, choice. I picked up the rusted key, turned it between my fingers, feeling the cool bite of metal and memory. Grandma's voice drifted back to me, faint as wind through dry leaves. "Don't lose your name, boy." And I didn't. I nearly did. I bent too far for too long, but I never broke. "I found it again," I whispered, placing the key back into the box. I clicked the latch shut, slowly, deliberately, then tucked it back into the drawer. Not hidden, just done. A few hours passed. I made dinner, cleaned the dishes, sat in my worn armchair with a mug of tea, letting the steam warm the cold spot behind my chest that used to ache. The phone buzzed once. It was Joseph. "Just wanted to confirm," he said without greeting. "Everything's wrapped up. They won't fight it. They know it's airtight." "Thanks," I said, my voice even. "I'm not trying to ruin anyone." There was a pause on the other end, then he replied, "Corin, they thought they could use you and walk away clean. I don't need them to lose," I said. "I just need to stop being their lesson." Another silence, but it wasn't heavy. "I'll call if anything changes," Joseph said finally, then hung up. I set the phone down and looked around the apartment. The same walls, the same floors, but everything felt different. Not because I'd changed the locks or moved a name on a document, but because for once, every object in this place was mine again. Not just legally, emotionally, spiritually. There was no applause, no catharsis, just that strange, subtle ache of letting go, the kind that's half sorrow, half relief. I walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer. Beside the bed, the new key sat on a small dish, shiny, untouched. I left it there and returned to the window. Snow still fell, softer now. It blanketed the street, the rooftops, even the cracked sidewalk where the Danners used to park. The world had moved on without their noise, and so had I. I whispered again, not to anyone in particular, maybe to the boy I used to be. Silence isn't weakness, it's just another kind of power. I turned off the lamp. As I did, the light caught the frame on the wall. The deed. My name, alone beneath the glass, reflected for a heartbeat before the room dimmed completely. And in that final breath of night, I knew the truth. They took everything they could carry, but I kept what mattered most. My peace.